Section 1 of The Practice of the Presence of God. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Chenevert. The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Section 1. The Four Conversations. The first conversation, conversion and previous employment, satisfaction in God's presence, faith our duty, resignation the fruit of watchfulness. The first time I saw Brother Lawrence was upon the 3rd of August, 1666. He told me that God had done him a singular favor in his conversion at the age of 18. That in the winter, seeing a tree stripped of its leaves, and considering that within a little time the leaves would be renewed, and after that the flowers and fruit appear, he received a high view of the providence and power of God, which has never since been effaced from his soul. That this view had perfectly set him loose from the world, and kindled in him such a love of God that he could not tell whether it had increased in above 40 years that he had lived since. That he had been footman to Monsieur Flubert, the treasurer, and that he was a great awkward fellow who broke everything. That he had desired to be received into a monastery, thinking that he would there be made to smart for his awkwardness and the faults he should commit, and so he should sacrifice to God his life with its pleasures, but that God had disappointed him, he having met with nothing but satisfaction in that state. That we should establish ourselves in a sense of God's presence by continually conversing with him, that it was a shameful thing to quit his conversation to think of trifles and fooleries. That we should feed and nourish our souls with high notions of God, which would yield us great joy in being devoted to him. That we ought to quicken, that is, to enliven our faith. That it was lamentable we had so little, and that instead of taking faith for the rule of their conduct, men amused themselves with trivial devotions which changed daily. That the way of faith was the spirit of the church, and that it was sufficient to bring us to a high degree of perfection. That we ought to give ourselves up to God with regard both to things temporal and spiritual, and seek our satisfaction only in the fulfilling of his will, whether he lead us by suffering or by consolation, for all would be equal to a soul truly resigned. That there needed fidelity in those drynesses or insensibilities and irksomenesses in prayer, by which God tries our love to him, that then was the time for us to make good and effectual acts of resignation, whereof one alone would oftentimes very much promote our spiritual advancement. That, as for the miseries and sins he heard of daily in the world, he was so far from wondering at them, that, on the contrary, he was surprised there were not more, considering the malice sinners were capable of. That, for his part, he prayed for them, but knowing that God could remedy the mischiefs they did when he pleased, he gave himself no further trouble. That to arrive at such resignation as God requires, we should watch attentively over all the passions which mingle as well in spiritual things as those of a grosser nature, that God would give light concerning those passions to those who truly desire to serve him. That if this was my design, viz., sincerely to serve God, I might come to him, Brother Lawrence, as often as I pleased, without any fear of being troublesome, but if not, that I ought no more to visit him. End of first conversation. Second conversation. Love the motive of all, once in fear, now in joy, diligence and love, simplicity the key to divine assistance, business abroad as at home, times of prayer and self-mortification not essential for the practice, all scruples brought to God. That he had always been governed by love without selfish views, and that having resolved to make the love of God the end of all his actions, he had found reasons to be well satisfied with his method. That he was pleased when he could take up a straw from the ground for the love of God, seeing him only and nothing else, not even his gifts. That he had been long troubled in mind from a certain belief that he should be damned, that all men in the world could not have persuaded him to the contrary, but that he had thus reasoned with himself about it. I did not engage in a religious life but for the love of God, and I have endeavored to act only for him. Whatever becomes of me, whether I be lost or saved, I will always continue to act purely for the love of God. I shall have this good at least, that till death I shall have done all that is in me to love him, that this trouble of mind has lasted 4 years, during which time he had suffered much. That since that time he had passed his life in perfect liberty and continual joy. That he placed his sins betwixt him and God, as it were, to tell him that he did not deserve his favors, but that God still continued to bestow them in abundance. That, in order to form a habit of conversing with God continually, and referring all we do to him, we must at first apply to him with some diligence, but that after a little care we should find his love inwardly excite us to it without any difficulty. That he expected, after the pleasant days God had given him, he should have his turn of pain and suffering, but that he was not uneasy about it, knowing very well that as he could do nothing of himself, God would not fail to give him the strength to bear them. That, when an occasion of practicing some virtue offered, he addressed himself to God, saying, Lord, I cannot do this unless thou enablest me, and that then he received strength more than sufficient. That, when he had failed in his duty, he only confessed his fault, saying to God, I shall never do otherwise if you leave me to myself. 'Tis you must hinder my falling and mend what is amiss. That after this he gave himself no further uneasiness about it. That we ought to act with God in the greatest simplicity, speaking to him frankly and plainly, and imploring his assistance in our affairs just as they happen. That God never failed to grant it, as he had often experienced. That he had been lately sent into Burgundy to buy the provision of wine for the society, which was a very unwelcome task for him, because he had no turn for business and because he was lame, and could not go about the boat but by rolling himself over the casks. That, however, he gave himself no uneasiness about it, nor about the purchase of the wine. That he said to God, it was his business he was about, and that he afterwards found it very well performed. That he had been sent into Auvergne the year before upon the same account, that he could not tell how the matter passed, but that it proved very well. So likewise in his business in the kitchen, to which he had naturally a great aversion, having accustomed himself to do everything there for the love of God, and with prayer upon all occasions for his grace to do his work well, he had found everything easy during the 15 years that he had been employed there. That he was very well pleased with the post he was now in, but that he was as ready to quit that as the former, since he was always pleasing himself in every condition by doing little things for the love of God. That with him the set times of prayer were not different from other times. That he retired to pray according to the directions of his superior, but that he did not want such retirement nor ask for it, because his greatest business did not divert him from God. That, as he knew his obligation to love God in all things, and as he endeavored so to do, he had no need of a director to advise him, but that he needed much a confessor to absolve him. That he was very